Over the past decade, the Philippines has invested heavily in new missiles, warships, military bases, and defense partnerships with countries like the United States and Japan.
Japan hands over 5 coastal radar systems to the Philippines, aimed to strengthen Manila's maritime domain awareness.
Over 17,000 personnel from the Philippines, the United States, and from our partner nations.
Australian and Filipino personnel, but also including US and Canadian forces. There are about 1,600 Australian personnel who will be participating in.
Almost every one of those efforts has focused on a single challenge: China. But here's something many people don't realize. The Philippines doesn't have just one territorial dispute. It also has a long-standing claim over Sabah, a Malaysian state on the island of Borneo. So if Manila disputes territory with both Malaysia and China, why has nearly every major military modernization program, naval deployment, and defense agreement been directed toward China instead of Malaysia? The answer isn't simply that one dispute matters more than the other. Both remain unresolved, but they are fundamentally different. One has largely remained a diplomatic issue for decades. The other has become one of the world's most active maritime flashpoints, with Coast Guard confrontations, water cannon incidents, ship collisions, and growing military competition. As strategic historian Sir Lawrence Freedman observed, strategy is about making choices under conditions of scarcity. No country has unlimited resources. Every defense budget, every new warship, and every military deployment reflects a judgment about which challenge poses the greatest risk. In this documentary, we'll examine the history, geography, military balance, and strategic realities behind both disputes to answer one simple question: why has Philippine defense planning focused so much more on China than Malaysia? To understand why the Philippines focuses so heavily on China, we first need to look at the dispute that many people outside Southeast Asia rarely hear about. That dispute is Sabah. Located on the northern tip of Borneo, Sabah is one of Malaysia's 13 states and has been administered by Kuala Lumpur since Malaysia was formed in 1963. Yet the Philippines has never formally abandoned its historical claim to the territory. The roots of that claim stretch back to 1878, when the Sultan of Sulu signed an agreement with the British North Borneo Company. The disagreement centers on how that agreement should be interpreted. The British regarded it as a permanent transfer of sovereignty, while the heirs of the Sultanate argued that it was only a lease. That legal disagreement continued through the colonial period and remained unresolved when Sabah became part of the newly formed Federation of Malaysia in 1963. Today, both governments maintain firmly opposing positions. The Philippine government says its historical claim remains legally valid and has not been relinquished. As recently as 2026, the Department of Foreign Affairs reaffirmed that the country's Maritime Zones Act did not affect the long-standing claim over North Borneo, and that the issue would continue to be pursued through diplomacy.
The Philippines formally asks the United Nations to register its extended continental shelf in the western Palawan region in the West Philippine Sea.
Malaysia rejects that position entirely. Kuala Lumpur considers Sabah an integral part of its sovereign territory and maintains that there is no territorial dispute to negotiate. The easiest way to understand the issue is to imagine two families holding different historical documents for the same property. One exercises full control over the land today, while the other believes history still supports its ownership. That is why the Sabah issue has endured for decades. It remains a diplomatic and legal disagreement rooted in history, but unlike the South China Sea, it has not become a regular military confrontation. At first glance, the Philippines' disputes with Malaysia and China may seem similar. Both involve competing territorial claims, both have historical roots, and both remain unresolved from Manila's perspective. But one key difference changes everything. The dispute over Sabah is primarily about land sovereignty. It concerns who has legal ownership of a specific territory on the island of Borneo. Malaysia administers Sabah as one of its states, while the Philippines continues to maintain its historical claim. For decades, the issue has been managed largely through diplomacy rather than military confrontation. The South China Sea is a very different kind of dispute. It is not only about small islands and reefs, It is also about control of surrounding waters, fishing grounds, offshore energy resources, and maritime rights under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Under UNCLOS, coastal states are entitled to an exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, extending up to 200 nautical miles from their coastline. Those maritime rights make the dispute far more strategically significant than the reefs alone. Think of it this way. Imagine two neighbors. One disagrees over the ownership of a piece of land, but rarely interacts with the other. The second faces regular challenges to its fishing boats and coast guard just outside its shoreline. Both disputes exist, but only one requires constant patrols, surveillance, and military readiness. The Philippines cannot change the fact that the West Philippine Sea lies along one of the world's busiest maritime corridors. That reality makes the South China Sea an active security challenge rather than simply a historical disagreement. Understanding this distinction explains why Philippine defense planning focuses less on who it has disputes with and more on where military pressure is actually occurring. If geography explains where the Philippines focuses its attention, the frequency of confrontations explains why China has become its primary security concern. Simply put, one dispute is mostly historical. The other is happening in real time. Although the Philippines maintains its claim over Sabah, military incidents involving Malaysia are extremely rare. The disagreement has largely remained a diplomatic issue, with both governments managing their differences through official statements rather than military deployments. The South China Sea is very different. Around Scarborough Shoal, Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels maintain a near-constant presence, regularly challenging Philippine fishing boats and government ships. According to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, Chinese activity around the shoal has remained consistently high, reinforcing Beijing's presence in the area. Second Thomas Shoal presents an even more direct challenge. Since the BRP Sierra Madre was grounded there in 1999, every Philippine resupply mission has carried the risk of confrontation. In recent years, these operations have involved water cannon attacks, dangerous maneuvers, laser incidents, and ship collisions. Even after a provisional arrangement in 2024 reduced tensions, the outpost still requires regular escort and resupply missions. This constant operational pressure shapes how militaries plan. Coast guards must patrol disputed waters. Naval vessels escort resupply missions. Maritime patrol aircraft monitor ship movements. Every encounter carries the risk of miscalculation and escalation. That is the fundamental difference between the Philippines' two territorial disputes. Sabah remains an unresolved historical claim. The South China Sea is an active operational challenge. For Philippine defense planners, the greatest priority is not the dispute that exists on paper, but the one unfolding at sea almost every week. If frequent confrontations explain why the Philippines pays attention to China, geography explains why it cannot afford to look away. Take a look at the map. To the west of the Philippines lies the South China Sea, one of the world's most strategically important bodies of water. To the north is Taiwan, and together these areas form part of the First Island Chain, a geographic corridor that has become central to military planning in the Indo-Pacific. Because of its location, the Philippines sits at the intersection of regional security, global trade, and great power competition. Now compare that with Sabah. Although the Philippine claim remains politically significant, Sabah does not occupy the same strategic position. It is not located along one of the world's busiest shipping routes, nor has it become the focus of continuous military competition among major powers. The South China Sea is different. According to UNTAD, around 80% of global trade by volume is transported by sea, and one of the world's busiest maritime corridors passes through the South China Sea. For the Philippines, this means its western coastline, particularly around Palawan, faces contested waters that are vital for shipping, fisheries, offshore energy resources, and maritime security. That is why the South China Sea occupies such a central place in Philippine defense planning. Sabah remains an important historical dispute, but the West Philippine Sea lies at the heart of today's strategic competition. History explains the claims. Geography explains the stakes. But military capability explains why Philippine defense planners prioritize one dispute over the other. Malaysia maintains a modern and professional military focused on defending its territory and maritime borders. Its Navy, Coast Guard, and Air Force are well equipped for national defense and regional security. But they are not structured to project military power across the wider Indo-Pacific. China operates on an entirely different scale. According to the U.S. Department of Defense and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the People's Liberation Army Navy is now the world's largest navy by battle force ships. It is supported by the China Coast Guard, the world's largest Coast Guard fleet, and a large maritime militia that maintains a persistent presence in disputed waters. Together, these forces allow Beijing to exert pressure without necessarily escalating to conventional warfare. Beyond its maritime forces, China fields aircraft carriers, advanced destroyers, submarines, long-range missile systems, and a growing network of surveillance assets and military facilities across the South China Sea. Combined with one of the world's largest defense budgets, these capabilities enable China to sustain continuous operations far from its mainland. This difference in capability directly shapes Philippine defense planning. Military planners prepare for the challenges they are most likely to face. A dispute with Malaysia would involve one set of military considerations. A confrontation in the South China Sea could involve Coast Guard vessels, maritime militia, naval forces, aircraft, missiles, and cyber capabilities operating simultaneously across a vast maritime theater. As Sir Lawrence Freedman has observed, military capability shapes strategic planning. That helps explain why the Philippines has invested in coastal defense missiles, maritime surveillance, modern warships, and stronger security partnerships. The objective is not to match China's military strength, but to build credible deterrence against the security challenges emerging in the West Philippine Sea. If you want to know what a country sees as its biggest security challenge, don't just read its official statements. Look at what it buys. Over the past decade, the Philippines has launched its most ambitious military modernization program in decades. Through the Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program and its Horizon phases, Manila has shifted from focusing mainly on internal security to strengthening its ability to defend its maritime territory. That shift is reflected in the capabilities it has acquired. The BrahMos coastal defense missile system is designed to deter hostile warships approaching Philippine shores. The Jose Rizal-class frigates have strengthened the Philippine Navy's anti-surface, anti-air, and anti-submarine capabilities, while new offshore patrol vessels are improving maritime surveillance and the protection of the country's exclusive economic zone. The same trend can be seen in military cooperation. Under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement EDCA, selected Philippine military bases have been upgraded to support joint training, logistics, and faster responses during regional crises. Meanwhile, the annual Balikatan exercises have expanded to include coastal defense, maritime security, amphibious operations, and live-fire missile drills, scenarios closely aligned with protecting the West Philippine Sea. Notice what all these investments have in common. They are designed for maritime defense, not for resolving a land dispute over Sabah. That does not mean the Philippines has abandoned its historical claim. It means defense planning is focused on the challenges Philippine forces face today. The country's modernization program is built to improve deterrence, strengthen maritime awareness, and protect Philippine interests in the West Philippine Sea. Taken together, these decisions provide perhaps the clearest indication of where Manila believes its primary security challenge now lies. At this point, some viewers may be asking an important question. Is the Philippines focusing on China because of its own security concerns, or because of its alliances with the United States and Japan? The answer is both, but not in the way many people assume. The Philippines has long been a U.S. treaty ally under the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. In recent years, that partnership has expanded through the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement EDCA, which supports joint training, military infrastructure, and closer coordination between the two armed forces. Japan has also become a key security partner. In 2024, the two countries signed a reciprocal access agreement, making it easier for their forces to train and operate together. Regular exercises such as Balikatan have also grown in size and complexity, improving interoperability with allies. But alliances alone do not explain Philippine defense policy. Philippine officials have consistently stated that national security decisions are guided by Philippine national interests and the country's own assessment of its security environment. Alliances provide training, technology, intelligence, and deterrence, but they do not determine which threats Manila chooses to prioritize. In fact, the sequence matters. The territorial disputes already existed. As maritime tensions in the West Philippine Sea increased, the Philippines deepened security cooperation with countries that shared an interest in regional stability and freedom of navigation. As many strategists observe, alliances are instruments of deterrence. They are intended to reduce the risk of conflict by making aggression more costly. In other words, alliances did not create the Philippines' focus on China. They are one of the tools Manila uses to manage the security challenges it already faces. So far, we've looked at the issue through history, geography, military capabilities, and Philippine policy. But do independent defense analysts reach the same conclusion? Broadly, yes. Although institutions such as RAND, CSIS, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and Australia's Lowy Institute each publish their own research, they identify a similar trend across the Indo-Pacific. The Philippines' changing defense priorities are being driven less by its historical claim over Sabah and more by the evolving security environment in the South China Sea. These analysts consistently point to three factors: China's expanding maritime capabilities, its persistent gray zone operations, and the growing frequency of confrontations in disputed waters. Together, these developments have transformed the West Philippine Sea into the Philippines' most immediate security challenge. As a result, many analysts argue that the armed forces of the Philippines are shifting from an internal security focus toward maritime defense. That shift is reflected in military modernization, greater maritime surveillance, stronger coastal defenses, and closer security cooperation with regional partners. Importantly, none of these assessments suggest that the Sabah claim has disappeared. Rather, they distinguish between a historical territorial dispute and an active strategic challenge. That distinction reinforces the central conclusion of this documentary. Philippine defense planning is shaped primarily by the security environment the country faces today, not simply by the age of its territorial claims. So, let's return to the question we asked at the very beginning. If the Philippines has territorial disputes with both Malaysia and China, why has its military focused so heavily on China? The answer is not that the Philippines has abandoned its claim over Sabah. It hasn't. Manila continues to maintain its historical claim, while Malaysia continues to administer Sabah as part of its sovereign territory. The difference lies in the nature of the two disputes. Sabah remains a historical and diplomatic issue. The South China Sea is an active maritime theater where territorial claims, international law, military competition, and repeated confrontations intersect almost every day. That reality has shaped Philippine defense planning. Military modernization, stronger maritime capabilities, and closer security partnerships are not aimed at rewriting history. They are designed to address today's security challenges. Ultimately, the Philippines is not choosing between Malaysia and China. It is prioritizing the challenge that presents the greatest strategic risk to its national security. The Sabah claim remains part of Philippine policy, of Philippine strategy.